Hello, Chase Oaks. Good to see everybody. Really glad you're here. I want to say hi to everybody at Legacy, at our Legacy campus, as well as everybody at Woodbridge right now. You can say hi to my wife, who comes here on Friday Night Legacy, and they're at Woodbridge right now. Sloan Creek in Richardson, Espanol, everybody online, wherever you are at, even in crazy places like Alabama, where I'm from. Really good to have you. So we are in this series. That's really an important series because we're talking about the life that Jesus came to bring us. The series called Happy Place, using that analogy of we all kind of have a happy place, of that God actually wants us to live a happy place existence in a way more profound way than maybe we even think. Like the song we just heard, Happier. You know, can you really believe that God actually does want you to be happier in a profound way? I mean, He really does want you to be happier. Now, in the song, you know, the guy in that song was talking to a girl saying, man, I'm so messed up and dysfunctional that I want you to be happier, which means I need to leave you because I'm getting in the way of your happiness and I need to just let you like smile and be happy and all that kind of stuff. With God, it's the opposite. Right? In fact, the only way you and I can live the happy place existence kind of life is with more of God in our life, for Him to fill us with His presence. As Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and that you would live it to the full. In fact, the word is overflowing, that we would be so full of God and what He wants for us that we overflow to others. It's the way of life you and I are created to live. All the way back in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve lived in that, but sin took that all away. Jesus came to restore it. We saw in the first week of this series how Jesus invites us to what He calls, in the original language of the New Testament Greek, a makarios life. Makarios is a word that could be translated happy or blessed or joyful, content, beautiful, significant. All those things rolled together. That's what He wants for us. But we also saw how you and I have responsibility for it. It won't just drop in our laps. The wise people who will live that way are people who put things into practice that He teaches. And there are certain practices that happy people do, that Jesus compels us to. And this series is built around those practices. And today, we're talking about a very important choice or a very important practice. Today, we're talking about purpose and how the happiest people on the planet are people who aren't just here, they're not just living life, but they're living life on purpose for a purpose bigger than they are, realizing that they've been designed for something and they're living into that. They're not just here. Again, they're doing something significant. You can think about that in terms of football. You know, this is sadly the end of football season, right? Next week, the Super Bowl. College football, as an Alabama fan, already ended so tragically a couple weeks ago. I'm still trying to get over that. Thank you. Many of you are praying for me and helping me as I grieve. And I'm a little too early to talk too much about it, so we'll move on to the Super Bowl, which is next week, right? And what do you know? The Patriots are in the Super Bowl again. Shocker. And we'll watch that game. And it'll be fun to watch it, right? I mean, there'll probably be 110 or so million people watching that game, and we'll be sitting on our couches eating chicken wings or whatever it is we're going to be eating. Or like one guy said, I heard that here's what the Super Bowl is. It's 100 million people who desperately need exercise sitting on their couches watching 22 people who desperately need rest. That's what's going to happen next week. And there's some truth to that. But imagine, as cool as it is to watch a Super Bowl, imagine the opportunity to play in that game, right? To be on one of those teams, especially the winning team, and to have that for your whole life, that experience that, man, you got to be on the field and you got to play, especially if you're an athlete and you've been preparing for that. I mean, how cool would that be? You know, be nothing like it. I mean, I've only known one person who's played in a Super Bowl, and when you talk to him about it, he lights up, and why wouldn't he, right? I mean, that'd be awesome. And here's the bad news. Never going to happen for you or me, right? So keep your spot on the couch. Save it. But I've got better news. And the good news, the better news, is that God actually has a way bigger opportunity for you than that. And He's thought about it. And that you're here with a sense of destiny and purpose from His perspective. You're not just here, you're here with a purpose. That He wants you, He's drafted you to be on His championship team, to be part of what He is doing in the world. And He wants to use you. And we will reap the rewards of everything we do for all eternity if we do it. In fact, it's even better than you and I have been drafted. to be on his team. You and I have been crafted to be on his team. The Bible lets us know God has actually thought about us before we were here. For example, to Jeremiah, this is what he said back in the Old Testament. Jeremiah was an Old Testament prophet. And he said, I knew you, young teenager, before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as my prophet to the nations. He's saying, Jeremiah, before you were even born, I had a destiny for you, and I shaped you for it. And you think, well, that's cool. Glad Jeremiah could say that. But the same thing is true about you and me. In Ephesians 2, we're told, for we are God's handiwork. It's a word that can mean work of art, God's handcraft, God's masterpiece, you could translate it. We're God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So God has actually thought about you and me. He hasn't just drafted us, he has crafted us. That you and I are on this planet with a sense of destiny. And the happiest people are those who find that and who live into it, whether it's in their vocation or in their ministry and in church or in the community or something like that. And the people who find that and live into it will often say things like this: I was made to do this. Like, I just love it. I love getting up every day. I was made for this. And you know why they say that? Because they were made for this. And they found it, right? And they found that way. And they're serving faithfully and they're putting that to use. And today, that's what I want all of us to be able to say. And none of us are fully living into the purposes that God created us for. All of us, in one way or another, some of the gifts and abilities and experiences and all that God's allowed us to cultivate and that God's given us, we're sort of burying part of it and maybe using part of it. And so today, I want us to get to the other side of that and be people who are like, we are made for this kind of people, and to live God's purposes. And to help us out, we're going to hear from Jesus. And always good to hear from Jesus, right? And it's in the book of Matthew, which is in the New Testament, the first book in the New Testament, if you're following along with me in a Bible app or your Bible. And it's a story that he tells called the parable or the story of the talents. And here's that story. Matthew 25:14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. So here's the story, right? A rich guy, wealthy guy, decides to give these 3 servants a huge opportunity, and he divides his wealth and gives his servants his wealth to multiply it, to do something with it. He's going to be gone a long time, and he wants a return. And what we're going to see in the story is they get a share in the gain. Like, they could go from nothing to wealthy too, as they share the gain. So he's entrusting this with them and with that responsibility. And the word servant is kind of a nice way to say it. The word is just slave. They were slaves. These were people who had no prospects, no potential, no opportunity, unless the master was gracious enough to say, here it is. And in this case, the guy in the story is saying, here it is. They have the opportunity to move from one status to another status to share in the gain if they're faithful. And he gives them a lot. And Jesus, of course, being a great storyteller, is making a big point, because when he gives them 5 bags of gold, 2 bags of gold, 1 bag of gold, it was a lot of money. This was a lot of wealth. The word translated in NIV that I just read, bag, is the word, it's talent. Talent was a measure of weight, of either metals or money. It was the highest measure that they had in the Greek and Roman system. And a talent was a lot. A talent's like 110 pounds. So 110 pounds of gold. That's a lot. If somebody wants to give you 110 pounds of gold, just a little tip, say, sure. Yeah, that'd be great. That's worth about $2.5 million, all right, a talent of gold. So what does he give? Well, player 1, the first guy, he gives $12.5 million. Player 2, $5 million. Player 3, $2.5 million. Anybody else want a new boss? Like, right? It's like I go to Racetrack a lot here by the Legacy campus to get gas, and when I do, I typically go in and get iced tea because I used to get Diet Coke, and Christy has finally shamed me out of drinking Diet Coke for whatever reason. And so I don't know how long it'll last, but for a year, I've been drinking iced tea. I don't know why I'm saying this. But anyway, I go, and I'm always behind people who are, buying lottery tickets. Well, these guys just won the lottery. right? Anybody could use $12.5 million here, make your life easier, right? And what they're given is a tremendous amount to work with. I mean, they're given a lot. And I think at this point in the story, Jesus, being a good storyteller, is doing that, making us think, wow, if I had that much, I could do a lot. I could do so much for God. I could do, right? And yeah, you could if you were faithful with it. But at this point in the story, really what he wants us to be thinking is, we'll get back to the story in a minute, but first we're going to stop and say, hey, what have I been given? I maybe haven't been given $12.5 million, but I have been given a lot. And you and I have been given way more than we think by God. I mean, money, certainly, the resources we have, but way bigger than that. You and I have been given opportunity. You and I have been given power. You and I have been given time. You and I have also been given what I'm going to call a calling, or what the Bible calls being called, or a calling. You and I have been given gifts and abilities and experiences and things that we're passionate about. God has poured that into us. He's designed us. He's crafted us to be used for His purposes. We've been given a lot. It's not just people with priest collars that have a calling. All of us do. And I want us to be able to say, I want us to be able to inventory that and say, yeah, what have I been given so I can be faithful with it? Here are the components of calling, or some of them. One of those is gifts, what the Bible calls gifts. Gifts are God-given abilities, strengths that He gives you and me to engage, to be a part of what He's doing in this world. So in 1 Corinthians 12, one of those passages that talks about gifts and how we're gifted, he uses illustrations of different gifts. He doesn't give an exhaustive list, but just says, hey, some people are really great at teaching. Some people are really great at administering, doing detail stuff. Some are great at helping. Some are great at counseling and that kind of, and shepherding people and so on. We all have different gifts. And in that spirit, or within that context, that's what the manifestation of the Spirit is, God giving these gifts. So he says, now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. So how many of us get a gift or two? All of us, okay? Each one. You're in the gifted and talented program, whether you know it or not. Congratulations, you're there. And they're given for the common good. God gives us these gifts, not for us, but for others. And for His purpose in the world, to serve. That's why we have these gifts. It's not for us, it's not about us, it's about the bigger picture. Here's another passage, Romans 12. This one, every phrase is really important to understand. In His grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. Let's unpack that a little bit. First of all, every one of these gifts comes out of God's generosity, comes out of God's grace. Just like the guy in the story, really generous. God is really generous, and He's given you and me gifts. Notice God is the one who does it. It's not you and me choosing our destiny or choosing our gifting, choosing our strengths. It's about us discovering that. We already come pre-given or pre-designed. God already has a destiny for us. He's already crafted us. And they're different gifts, right? Each one of us have different strengths and abilities. And you may look at me operating in my gifting and think, wow, it's amazing. But I look at you and your gift area and think, wow, that's amazing. I wish I could do that. I just feel so stupid and small and whatever. Because it's sometimes easier to appreciate other gifts more than our own. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And notice these gifts are given so that we can do certain things well. You and I can't do everything well, but you can do certain things well. That's the point of gifting. And God has thought about you. He's gifted you so that you could do certain things well. So if your mom, let's say you grew up, and I hope you did grow up with a mom that said this to you. If you didn't, I'm sorry. And you can borrow my mom, and I'll have her call you, seriously, and she'll tell you this. And because here's what I want you to hear. If your mom said to you when you were growing up, you're special, you're unique, you're one of a kind, you're right. Your mom was right. And you need to, if your mom's still alive, call her and say, Mom, thanks for that. I appreciate that. And again, if you didn't, call me or email me and I'll have my mom call you and he'll tell you that. But if your mom said this also, you can be anything you want to be if you just work hard enough. You can do anything you want to do if you just try hard enough. If your mom told you that, then your mom's delusional, okay? She's sweet and wonderful, and it's okay. Moms get a pass on delusional about their own kids. That's okay. But that's not the way it works. I mean, it'd be fun to be a power forward for the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA. But I'm never going to get there, I don't think. I have not, created for that.
no matter what I do or how hard I try, right? And here's the good news about you. It's not that you can do anything. It's better. The real news about you is better than this. That God has put you on this planet not to do anything, but to do something. That he thought about you. And he gave you gifts and opportunity and all that with that in mind. You and I have a destiny to fulfill, a calling to live out. I'm just going to introduce this because we'll spend a little bit more time on it later. But all of us in different areas, there's some things that we'll try to do that I would call is in our pitiful zone. We're just terrible. I'm not a detailed person, if you know me. We have someone living with us right now who's here for 3 months to audit a company he's with an accounting firm. And 3 months auditing a company. I'm so in detail, it would take me like 30 minutes. Not 3 months. I'd look at generally and say, I think you guys are good. Let's go play golf, So you don't want me doing that. Then there's a mediocre zone where we can be pretty good but not great. And then this is our gifting zone, our strength zone, where we're serving in an area of strengths, where we can make an extraordinary contribution. And that's where we want to spend as much time as possible, but we'll come back to that. In addition to gifting is experiences, that good and bad, that God allows us to experience, that they become part of our ministry, that become part of our calling. Like in 2 Corinthians 1, the Apostle Paul says this. He says that God comforts us in all of our afflictions, meaning all of our difficulties, all of our suffering, all of our pain, whether it's self-induced from our failure and we messed up our life and messed up some things, or just life happens and we suffer and we go through disappointment, difficulty, sickness, whatever. That God comforts us so that he in turn can comfort others through us. Meaning when God allows us to get through something, when he allows us to go through something, it then becomes our stewardship, our privilege, our responsibility to help others get through what we've gone through. Because we're the most equipped to do that, because we've been there. And that's why as a pastor, when people come to me with certain needs and certain problems and certain things, the most gracious thing I can do and what I try to do is say, let me connect you with somebody who has gone through that, who has journeyed through that. God has helped them. And they're right where you are. They've been right where you are. They know what addiction is, and they're sober, and they're working on it every day. And I want you to talk to Brian, or whatever. Or this person, has also lost a child, and I'm so sorry. And that's the toughest journey I can imagine. And I want to connect you, right? Whenever we go through something, it's our opportunity, it becomes part of our calling. Same way positively. We have experiences in life, educational experiences, job experiences, other kinds of experiences that God can translate into ministry. Like a friend of mine who was a teacher for a long time and sees the need for tutoring for students, especially students who have homes that are under-resourced. And man, she knows these kids would do a lot better if they could have some tutoring, if they could have some help and encouragement. And so she's starting a thing for teachers and tutors called Chase Oaks Tutoring. And if you can email me if you're interested in that. But it's just, we need to think through experiences too, good, bad, and ugly, because that becomes part of our calling. Also, passion. Here's what a passion is. A passion is a deep sense of connection, like a sense of, man, I've got to do something about this, to a cause, to a need, to a people group, to a problem to solve, to a vision to achieve, to a particular area of ministry or vocational field, where God just kind of puts something in your being deep down, and you just know you can't ignore this. Sometimes you become aware of something and it disrupts you. And it's like, there's no way it can be that way. Somebody's got to do something. And you know that somebody's you. They're like, I've got to do something. Or there's some potential or some ministry area. You think, man, junior high or whatever it is that God just puts on your heart. And you can't shake it. And pay attention to that. It's part of our calling. God doesn't do that indiscriminately. It's on purpose. So you put all that together and you think, okay, what have I been given? And you and I have been given a lot. We've all been given a calling. And then the question is, well, then what do I do with what I've been given? Because here's the thing about what we've been given. Given is probably really not the right word. The word that's used is entrusted. There's a big difference between being given something and being entrusted with something. God hasn't just given us what he's given us, just like in the story, he didn't just give them this money, he entrusts them with these talents, with these millions of dollars. And here's the difference between giving and entrusting. Let's say you do a good job of managing money and you save a chunk of money and like $10,000, and you've got this $10,000, and you don't want to manage that money yourself. You want to give it over to a money manager and like an investment person. And here's how you know the difference. If you give that check to a money manager, a financial person to invest, if you give them that check and she's like, oh, thank you for this $10,000. Oh man, I've got kids who need braces. They're going to have college coming. I mean, this is going to be so helpful. Thank you so much for this gift. You'll be like, time out. It's not a gift. This is mine. I'm entrusting it to you, and I want it back. I just want it back bigger. That's why I'm giving it to you, right? That's the difference between being given something and being entrusted with something. And this guy who leaves is going to come back, and he's going to hold them accountable to say, well, what did you do with what you've been given? And that's the same thing for you and me. What God has entrusted us with, he will ask us, our reward will be based on this question. And what am I doing with what I have been given? Am I being faithful with it or not? Am I burying it or am I using it? So what did these guys do in the story? Well, let's get back to the story. Player one, the guy that got, a bunch of money, $12.5 million, 5 talents. The man who'd received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. He's a go-getter. Immediately, he's faithful with it. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. Awesome. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. He just buries it. He doesn't do anything with it to get a gain, which is not the right answer, as we're going to see in the story. So player one gets this result. He now has $25 million. Player two, $10 million. Player three still has the same $2.5 million. Right, now that's important because after a long time, the guy comes back. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with him. And he's expecting a return, right? He's expecting, hey, it's been a long time. I want to know what you've done with the money, and they're going to get a share of the reward. And here's what happens. Player one, the man who'd received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Now he's got, $25 million. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Pretty awesome. Player two, same conversation. And he says, well done, my good and faithful servant. Come share your master's happiness. And now their status has changed. Now it's a big deal for them. And then you get to player three. And can I get an uh-oh from the crowd? Because this is definitely an uh-oh story for player three. Then the man who'd received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. Meaning, man, you're a good business guy, you're shrewd, and you're kind of, tough-minded. I knew you were kind of a hard guy. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. Here's your 2.5. I didn't lose it, but I didn't get anything from it either. I buried it. Now, that's not the right answer, but notice who he blames for burying what he was given. He didn't blame himself, right? He's really blaming the guy. He's saying, you're a really tough guy, and you're scary. And if you weren't so mean and scary, I'd kind of be like these other guys and do something really cool, and, you'd get a return too, but you're just kind of mean and scary. You probably need to go to like a Carnegie, training thing about management and how to, it's what he's insinuating, and it doesn't go over really well. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. You knew I was a shrewd business guy. Well, then you should have at least put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's pretty tough, right? You think, I like stories with happy endings, and I do too. And for player 1 and 2, it was a happy ending. For player 3, not so much. And some of you, if you're gifted, like you have a lot of mercy and compassion, and right now you're kind of really concerned about this guy. But he's not a real guy, so don't worry about it. Just a story. And Jesus is using a pretty extreme ending here to make a big point. And that is that you and I want to be player 1 and 2. We don't want to be player 3. that we want to be faithful to use what we've been given to make a difference. We want to, like that brings a happy place existence. The other brings sort of its own hell, a purposeless existence. And what we don't want to do is just bury what God has given us to use for his purposes. But here's the thing. It's easy to do that. In fact, it's way easier to bury what God has given rather than put it to use. And all of us at one extent, one of us at one level or another are burying part of what God has given us to be faithful with. And some of us, all of it, like we're just missing it. And you don't want to be it. And there's reasons for that. Like this guy had a reason why he was burying his treasure, why he was burying what he was given. You and I do too. And I want us to be open enough. I'm going to give some possible reasons to just listen and say, hey, are any of these working on me? Because these reasons aren't really reasons, they're excuses that we have to push through. So here's the first one. The first one why a lot of people really don't live in God's purposes and have this sort of, I was made for this kind of life and pursue thing, is fear. Here's the deal about fear. Anybody who ever does anything for God in a significant way has to push through fear and take a step of faith. Because it could fail, what if it doesn't work? I mean, you read through anybody in the Bible, any of their stories, anything for God, they had to push through fear. It's not like, oh, those people are so brave, they never had fear, but I'm kind of afraid. No, they all had fear just like we do. You have to push through fear to get there. So maybe you think, oh man, God's given me a passion for this particular thing, but it's scary, I don't know what I do. Or, man, I think I really, maybe even vocationally, I'm kind of mismatched, and I think I need to pursue something else that's scary. Or maybe in ministry, you know, God puts on your heart to say, man, I really want to serve in youth ministry, but it's scary. Like, what if it doesn't work? What if the kids don't like me? What if they tie me up and do mean things to me? And that's a valid fear. I've seen that happen. It's in youth ministry. It can be ugly. But you think, you know, right, you have to push through that fear. And I can relate to that. I mean, all my life, God has put things in front of me, and sometimes I've shrunk back in fear, and sometimes, by God's grace, I have stepped forward and pushed through fear to say yes, and every time I'm glad I have. And every time that happens, there's a story I think about. It's one of our that we've already looked at, and that is the call of Jeremiah. Remember earlier in the message where God said, Jeremiah, before you were formed in the womb, I knew you, and I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Here's what happens next in that story. Jeremiah is a teenage kid. Or, excuse me, a lot of you are teenagers, teenage young adult. He's a teenager, and he says, so you want me to be a prophet to the nations and go before kings and authorities? You know who you're talking to? Like, I'm a teenager, like I'm playing video game. Like I don't really think I'm the one to do that yet. And God says, hey, Jeremiah, don't say that. Because you're not alone when you step forward in faith. I'm going to be with you. And I'll put my words in your mouth. And you'll stand before kings and authorities, but not alone. I'll be with you, and and Jeremiah goes for it. And I think about that every time to say, okay, I know I'm not on my own. If I step forward when God's urging me to step forward, he's going to be there. And he's going to put his words in my mouth or put, whatever, right? But we have to push through fear. Don't allow fear to hold you back from purpose. Another one is ignorance. Ignorance is I just don't know what God's given me. Like, I don't know what he's given me in terms of experiences. I've never thought through it like that, or gifts and abilities. I don't really know what those are. I don't know what I have to use. And here's the good news about ignorance. I mean, the bad news is that's a bad problem. The good news is ignorance, among all the world's problems, is a really good problem to have because it's pretty easy to solve. You just become knowledgeable. And the knowledge is there. You just have to get it. You have to discover it. So how do we discover our design? How do we discover our calling? How do we discover our gifting? Well, these days, there's a lot of ways. I mean, there's all these tests and stuff. You can also do trial and error. Just start serving and see what happens. And right now, in our Happy Place groups, you have an incredible opportunity. Because what we're asking all of our Happy Place small groups to do is to have an I see in you conversation. To say, hey, let me tell you a strength or something I see in you that I think is really cool that God is using and wants to use more. And the reason it's important to have I see in you conversations is that most of us can't see our own gifting. We take what we offer for granted. We can see it in other people. For us, that's just what we do. Like, it doesn't feel like a big deal. Like, everybody can do that. Like, for me to stand up in front of a group of people and talk, well, that's easy. But I mean, who can't do that? But I look at people who do amazing other things and think, wow, they're so gifted, And so we take us for granted. And so let's help each other out and just name things. So maybe in your group, something like this, just say, hey, you know what? I don't know if you realize how powerful this is, but when my life is falling apart and I'm really struggling, you're the one person more than anybody else I want to talk to, because you're compassionate and you're empathetic and you really listen and you're so helpful. And I know you really, really care. And man, God really uses that. I hope you know that. Or somebody, man, you know, when you talk and you have a lot of insight in our group. I don't know if you realize, I mean, you're just talking, but like it's really helpful for the rest of us. You have a lot of wisdom and maybe teaching is something you do. Or, man, you're such a great leader or hospitality. I mean, when we're at your house, like it's so different. You know, when our group's at your house, it's just the hospitality and all this. And so just have those conversations, because most of us don't know our own gifting. Another is expectations of others that can keep us from living out, like we can live somebody else's life or fail to live our own life that God has prepared us for just because of expectations of others. Those could be mismatched expectations or no expectations. So mismatched expectations is where, maybe you grew up in a home where you can be anything you want to be as long as it's these two things, which is great if it's those two things or five things or whatever it is. And as parents, it really is our job to help grow our kids in a way where they become increasingly aware of their destiny and design that God has given them. And we should have IC&U conversations with our kids a lot. But it's actually sometimes easier to speak what we want in them rather than what's there. Like God is the one who does that. But sometimes we just want our kids to be more like us or to do what we want them to do, whether that actually fits who they are or not. And I've made that mistake with my own kids, or at least almost did, and I'm sure I have. But a couple years ago, I was talking to my dad, who it was toward the end of his life. My dad died almost 2 years ago he had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. So when I'm having this conversation, it was about my youngest son, Caleb, who was graduating from college. And at that stage, my dad was in bad shape physically. In ALS, you lose your muscles and ability to move and all that. So he couldn't move his lower body at all. He's in a wheelchair. He could move his upper body, but very awkwardly, with a lot of difficulty. He couldn't speak anymore, couldn't talk. So I'm talking to him about Caleb, and who's graduating from college, making career decisions and all this. And it's just very different than the way I would approach it. Caleb has always been high risk oriented, no fear, very driven, very goal oriented, and bull in a china shop kind of guy. And so he just processes differently. So I was struggling with that, and with the way it was different. And so I told him, I said, it's just different than the way I would, approach this stage of life. And so my dad is typing on his iPad. That's the way he could communicate. And he would type out this stuff on iPad, punch a button, and it would speak computer voice what he wanted to say. And he had to have this big, huge stylus. It was about that big because his hand coordination was not good. And it took him a long time to do it. So I'm talking about Caleb, and I can tell he's writing out thing. And then finally he punches it. You know what he said? He said, of course Caleb isn't doing it like you would. Caleb is not you. He said, let Caleb be Caleb. He will do great. And I'm so glad my dad said that. And I'm so glad I listened to it, because he was right. And Caleb is finding his path, and he's doing a great job. And I could have discouraged it. I could have squished it. I could have done all kinds. And I'm glad I didn't. And so don't let the expectations of others keep you from what God wants for you. Same thing with no expectations. Like I said, we should be able to, or we should have these conversations with our kids a lot to give them a sense of destiny, a sense of purpose, a sense of uniqueness, because that's our job, is to help our kids discover that. God has gifted them. He has a destiny. It's our privilege to help them. We should, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful that I grew up in a home that I experienced that. None of us grew up in perfect homes, but I am thankful that I grew up in a home where that conversation was a conversation. I grew up with a sense of destiny. I grew up with a sense of, it's not you can do anything, but what's your thing? And then my parents' deal was, we'll help you do your thing as long as you're really giving yourself to it and taking it seriously. We'll support you every way we can. And I'm very thankful for that. In fact, I'll share with you something I haven't shared with anybody until this weekend. It's the last text my dad wrote me before he passed away. And And to write this text would have taken him at that place in his ALS, would have taken him probably 30 minutes to write this text. And he watches, or did watch, online. He was an online Chase Oker. And this is the last text I have from him. Here's what he said after hearing that message. He said, Jeff, I just heard Sunday's sermon for a third time when Mom played for Ricky, the guy who cared for him. A masterpiece. Love you. I'm so glad I found that the other day. And as the last thing I, kind of heard from my dad, I'll always have that with me, but I'm so thankful for a dad who would say that. And please understand, he didn't tell me everything I did was a masterpiece. He was pretty clear when it wasn't, and hey, this is probably not your thing, dude. In fact, one time he told me about doing physical things and all that because he was good at plumbing and electrician, and I wanted to learn some things. And he said, I really don't think you want to learn this stuff, because he knew what. But yeah, at the same time, I grew up with some clarity about, and I'm so thankful for that. And maybe you didn't grow up with that, and in fact, maybe you heard you'll never amount to anything, or you don't have anything, you're a loser, whatever. And I'm sorry if that's what you grew up in, but if that's your deal, here's what you got to do, is you got to go above the head of your dad or your mom or whoever that is. You got to go way above their pay grade to hear truth, and that's God the Father, who says, hey, that's not true. The truth is you're a masterpiece created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he prepared in advance. That's who you are. So don't let the expectations of others do that. Or maybe sometimes you get stuck in a season. There are times to be faithful to a season. I mean, life happens and things happen, and you have to kind of put your core calling and gifting aside for a little bit, maybe because somebody gets sick or you get sick or you need to care for somebody or something happens, some crisis or life stage of a company or of a career, or you have kids and you decide, hey, let's one of us spend more time doing that. And so you just say, even though this is part of my calling, my family, I'm going to, some of this stuff I'm going to set aside. And that's all good to be faithful to a season. But it's easy to get stuck in a season, that when the season's over, to kind of lose yourself a little bit. And so be faithful for the season, and then when the season's over, ask, okay, now how can I be faithful in this new season? Delusion is another. A lot of people are deluded. It's not their mom that's deluded, they're deluded, or maybe both, meaning they think they're gifted in ways that they're not. And therefore living outside their calling. You know how we talked about this pitiful zone, mediocre zone, extraordinary zone? Hardly anybody will stay in their pitiful zone very long, even if they're deluded enough to think, I'm really good over here. Like me being an auditor, think I'm going to be an auditor. I will get fired away from that, shamed away, laughed away. We all will, out of our pitiful zone. So I'm not too worried about that. But it is very possible for people to live in the mediocre zone and miss the extraordinary zone. Often because you maybe value something that you're not. You value a contribution, you value a calling, and it's just not who you are. But you value that more than what you are, and so you work really hard. There's an executive coach named Bob Beal that once said, the saddest people I work with, he works with like Fortune 100 executives, 500 executives, the saddest people I work with are those who are highly skilled but not highly gifted. Meaning they have enough work ethic that even in their mediocre zone, they're gutting it out and doing pretty good, but it's never great. They never have a sense of, I was made for this. And if you don't have that sense, it's just a red flag that, hey, maybe you've got some work to do. So when you look at all these things together, any of these working on you, keeping you from fully living into what God wants or causing you to bury part of who you are? It could be fear or ignorance or expectations of others stuck in a season, delusion. There's other examples. But it's really important to think through that because God doesn't want us to bury our treasure. And we don't want to miss what he has for us, right? We all want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. Come and share in your master's happiness. That's what we all want, to be faithful with what God's given us. And as a church, we want that for you too. And so that's why there's a couple of really good opportunities right now. One of those is a Happy Place. If you're not in a Happy Place group, get in one. And we'll have these I See in You conversations. But another way we just want to make this super helpful, get rid of all the excuses we can, is when you came in at Legacy or at the campuses, they're in the seat back in front of you, there's this little disc. It says, I want to find my place. Go ahead and pull that out. Now, see you. And And if you would like to have a conversation with one of our staff people, we're going to call you and talk about it. It could be, hey, in your vocation, give perspective there. It could be ministry in church. Man, I really would like to help do stuff around here. I just don't know what. Or with one of our community partners serving in our community. And what will happen, conversations will start Monday night, and they'll call, leave a message if you're not there. And our staff will just call you and just say, hey, let's talk about it. We want to do all we can to help you find your place. And so fill that out. And if you'd like to participate in that, and at all the lobbies, there's baskets that you can stick that into. Because here's the thing. And you and I won't play in a Super Bowl, and that would be cool, but it's not going to happen. But as I said, God has given us something so much better. And those guys in the Super Bowl will be telling stories about it forever, or at least in this lifetime. But you and I and God's thing, in what God wants to do, we'll literally be sharing stories forever. And we'll be rewarded forever for everything that we do. And we'll have a share of the reward even now as we get to engage and sort of have this, man, I was made for this kind of a thing. And with that in mind, let's bow our heads together and ask that God would help us to be able to live that purpose. And I invite you just to talk to God. Prayer is just talking to God in your own words. And right now, I would encourage you to ask God this question. God, am I burying part or all of what you've given me to be faithful with? God, any of these reasons working on me? And if so, just ask him to help you push through that and to take a step toward faithfulness, toward purpose. And Father, on behalf of all of us, I just thank you. You could do everything you do without us, but you choose instead to do it through us. As broken and messed up and clunky as that is, and we are, you just love doing that, and we thank you. And Father, help us to take steps toward being increasingly faithful, to live a life of purpose, an energized, happy place. I was made for this kind of way to live. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.